Simeon Elliott.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk a little bit first, personally, about my experience of working in special education and the challenges that lie ahead of us in terms of maintaining public spending. I'm doing that to give a rationale, a personal rationale, for why we need to scrap Trident. And then I'm going to talk more generally. Is that causing problems? Yeah, it's not good, is it? How's that? Is that better? Yeah, okay. Then I'm going to talk more generally about what could be used with the £100 billion that could be, that replacing Trident would cost. And at the end, I'm going to talk about what we can do as Labour Party members to advance an anti-austerity agenda and get Trident cancelled. Does that sound okay, comrades? Good. Okay. Well, start off telling you a bit about me. I'm a special educational needs teacher in Brighton and Hove. I've worked as a local authority teacher for 30 years. I started off in the Inner London Educational Authority, where I was described by the Tories as part of the loony left, and the IDA was abolished in 1990. So I have had experience of the Tories' interference in the public sector and the great destruction they cause. I'm extremely fearful that if we have another Tory administration, that by the end of the next Parliament term in 2020, there will be hardly any public sector left. This is a huge issue, and this is one of the issues why we need to address not wasting money on a completely useless weapon of mass destruction. But I'm just going to start by telling you about one of the children I work with, because I think it illustrates exactly what's going wrong. I work with a little boy called Khaled. That's not his real name, obviously. He's a little 3-year-old with special education needs. He has language delay, and he can't understand what people say. He's also got asthma, and he has emotional, social and behavioural difficulties. He lives with his mother, and she fled to Brighton to escape from domestic violence. Now, Khaled lives in temporary accommodation in Brighton, which is absolutely disgusting. There's mould on the walls. It's a single-bedroom tenement flat. He shares one room with his mother. There's nowhere to play. He can't go outside because there isn't a garden. He can't play on the tenement walkways because it has a reputation for drug dealing and knife crime. It's absolutely shocking. When I contacted the council's housing department, you can imagine what they said in Brighton or anywhere else in the United Kingdom. There is a phenomenal shortage of social housing. There is nowhere for them to go. He has been in that accommodation for a year. It's totally unsuitable, it's damaging his emotional health, it's damaging his physical health. Now, Khaled's mother hasn't got a job, although she's seeking work. It will be incredibly hard for her to find a job in Brighton as someone with a low range of qualifications. There are jobs in Brighton for women with few qualifications. They are appallingly badly paid. If she worked in, say, the fast food industry, or in the sort of jobs that are available for women, shops, hotel cleaning, being a care assistant, that's just not feasible. She would still be on benefits just to have enough to feed her child. When I visited the child's home, there weren't any toys in it because she actually can't afford them. That's absolutely true. I've very rarely been in a house where someone is so poor that they only have toys. He's entirely dependent on the toy library to have any experience of play. Now, Khaled obviously needs decent housing, like many, many people in this country. His mum needs a decent job and not a low-paid job that actually pays. And while she's unemployed, she needs decent benefits in order to preserve her child's well-being. But despite this shocking state of affairs, there are some good things going on for Khaled, but these are under direct threat now. Khaled's received excellent public education and health service support. He's received things like speech and language therapy. But in Brighton and Hove, the local authority's contribution to speech and language therapy has been cut because of the change in the revenue support grant proposed for the next 5 years. His services are providing in a children's centre. 4 of the 12 children's centres in Brighton and Hove were scheduled to be closed. They've been given a 1-year reprieve, but unless austerity is addressed, all of those children's centres will close, those 4 children's centres in the next year, and by the end of the next Parliament, all 12 will have gone. So basically, unless we can address austerity, there's minimal support that many of the children that I work with who are already disadvantaged is going to be lost. Now, in Brighton and Hove, we've seen predictions of the change in the revenue support grant. These are going to be cut continuously over the next 5 years. At the end of the next Parliament, unless we reverse austerity, Brighton will have a budget deficit of £102 million. That basically means that all of the public services, except those that have statutory ring fence, like the school's budget, will go. And what a lot of people don't realise is a lot of the services that councils provide come from the funder and from the revenue support grants. So the things that support the most vulnerable will end. And we are sleepwalking into this. We need to have a really clear position from the Labour Party on tackling austerity, which I'll come to. Just a little aside, my colleagues in East Sussex, I'm a preschool special educational needs teacher. The preschool special educational needs service in East Sussex my colleagues have just had their salaries cut by 25% and their contracts changed. This is the way cuts are enacted. People are forced to leave by having their jobs change, their terms and conditions of service, so they can no longer afford to do that job. Those people leave to work elsewhere. Their jobs become unreplaceable because no one will work on those paying conditions. And the Tory authority will say, oh no, we're just doing something much more efficient. We've employed people with no qualifications. So bear in mind that even when it appears as if services continue in many of the things that we cherish, they're not actually continuing. They're being replaced by a much more substandard service. So there's 2 elements of local authority cuts, the things that are go and the things which are destroyed in terms of their quality and benefit to the public. Now, I'm sure when John gets here, he will repeat these words. Austerity is a completely bogus political construct. It's not a reality. There's plenty of wealth in this country, the wealth is in the wrong places. That's really clear. If any of you have read Andrew Fisher's book, The Failed Experiment, it's very, very clear what we need to do. What we need to do is introduce progressive taxation of the rich, we need to tax corporations heavily, and we need to stop wasting hundreds of billions of pounds on a completely useless weapon of mass destruction. That's where we've got to now. Let's think, what would we do with £100 billion? A lot. £100 billion is actually the size of the annual deficit in this country. So the Tories have gone on and on and on about reducing the deficit. They've actually increased it by producing a low-wage economy which doesn't produce tax receipts and as a result disempowers the state from providing decent public services. They are now suggesting that they waste a further £100 billion over 30 years on Trident. Now sadly we're in a position where the Labour Party is not fully committed to cancelling Trident. It's very equivocal. We're committed to considering the renewal of Trident in the review coming up next year. But there is good news. I'll come to that later. But first, let's just think about what you could do with the money. Now, in this report, I'm not sure if we've got copies of this at the back. You can certainly read it all online at CND's website. The economist Michael Burke, who's not a super left economist, he's actually a city economist, points out a few really important truths about Trident. The first thing he points out is obviously Trident has absolutely no function. It's not an independent deterrent and can only be used in the event of a global nuclear conflagration, in which case that's the end of the world. So what's the point of it? It has no point. Now, unlike spending on houses or schools or other areas, there is no long-term benefit. Now, when we can see what we could do with the money in terms of investment in council housing or education or the health sector, those forms of spending £100 billion not only provide decent services to people, they produce economic growth. Now, in the most, I think I said, in the recent financial year, we actually had an underlying deficit of £110 billion, as opposed to an increased deficit next year, which would be double that, or the year after, if we renew Trident. Now, what could you do with it? Now, there are two distinct propositions that Michael Burke suggests. One is that you invest in infrastructure, another is you invest in things which make a difference to people's lives and improve the economy in a slightly different way. The clearest example of infrastructure improvement is investing in housing. Now, I think it's so obvious to us all in the left that the Labour Party failed in '97 to address the housing crisis. We should have built council homes. It was so obvious. We are now in the most appalling situation throughout the whole country where landlords are becoming rich through housing benefits. There is socialism, we've heard this before, there's socialism for the rich. The rich suck up money from the poor and all taxpayers pay for that. The only way we can stop that is to invest in public projects, including council housing. Now, with £100 billion, what could we build? We could build 650,000 new houses. Not only would that have an effect on addressing homelessness in this country, it would also bring back jobs in the construction sector which have been sadly lost. So the improvement to the economy will be reducing ridiculous rents, it will be providing public housing for the most needy, and it would actually boost the economy by providing real jobs, not the sham jobs that are being provided by this government. Now let's consider education. Now, the Institute of Fiscal Studies estimates that spending on education is going to fall from 6.2% of GDP in 2010 to 4.6% in the current financial year. Now, it's hard to work out what that means, but that's about £26 billion not invested in education. Now, obviously, not having a decent education blights the lives of children, as not having proper services for children with special educational needs and disabilities blights their future prospects. But there's also something else about education. Investment in education produces economic growth because a skilled labour force produces money. So the outcome of Tory spending cuts in education will be to diminish children's experience of education and further impoverish the economy. So in every way, austerity is completely absurd. Not only is it disable and disempower the poorest and neediest of our country, but it actually inhibits economic growth. It's madness. Now, Michael Burke's position on Trident is echoed very strongly by Michael Fisher from the Labour, the Left Economic Advisory Panel. I contacted Michael before this, Andrew, before this talk, and just said, if you had £100 billion, what would make a difference? You're an economic expert, tell me. And he did. Basically, he reinforced Michael Burke's position that we need to build council housing. We also need major infrastructure projects, such as rail, and building environmental ways of producing energy. Now, I'm not talking about the Green Party's agenda. I come from Brighton. I see the Green Party. I have to say they're a very destructive force in the left. They give people the illusion of progress. They give people the illusion that they're going to do something. What they've done in Brighton is pay GMB workers less. They have engineered putting up the children's centre closer for a political stunt to attract the Labour Party. And they're a party which appeals entirely to the Brighton chattering middle-class elite with no reach to working-class voters at all. So when we're talking about a green economy, we're talking about Labour environmentalism. The environment is the property of citizens, the property of everybody. It's a working class issue. So spending money on environmental projects is something which the Labour Party should be fully committed to, as well as building houses and funding education. Now, the obvious thing that probably everyone is concerned about in the United Kingdom is the NHS. The NHS is in a terrible state, as we know, mostly due to privatisation. The Labour Party has woken up recently to the notion that people don't like privatisation. It's a shame that understanding hasn't been extended to Tristram Hunt yet. There's a little bit of work to be done on Labour education policy. I'm a member of the NUT, and Brian and Hove persuading Labour members, or persuading members of the NUT to vote for Labour is still an uphill task. But we do have excellent Labour NUT members. Warren over here, who does fantastic work in opposing academies. There's an area that we need to work on. So, we need a green environmental policy, we need building, but we need an NHS. We need an NHS that provides a decent service for ordinary people. Now, what could you do with £100 billion? You can do some amazing things. You could fund all accident and emergency services for 40 years across the whole country with the cost of replacing Trident. Alternatively, you could build 180 state-of-the-art hospitals with the cost of renewing Trident. Or you could employ 150,000 nurses for 30 years with that cost. Pretty simple, really, isn't it? I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. So the economic arguments for not renewing Trident are really, really obvious. Obviously, there are also the moral arguments. I'd just like to quote Jane Basham, who's a Labour parliamentary candidate for South Suffolk, who makes the very obvious point that on each Trident submarine there are 40 warheads. Each of those could kill over 1 million people. Then there's the suffering endured by those who die from secondary radiation. All of this destruction just at the push of a button. Absolutely unthinkable. There is no deterrent value for that because it would ensure mutual self-destruction. Now, basically, being against the renewal of Trident is not just a Labour issue because it's about a way of providing services for the poor and the needy and reversing public spending cuts. It's a humanitarian argument. It's about life. It's about the very core of what being Labour means. So, where are we now? We're actually in quite a strong position. CND, Labour CND has canvassed all of the prospective parliamentary candidates for Labour, and 75% of those are actually opposed to cancelling Trident. Renewing Trident. So, yes, that's good. Not true. 75% are definitely against.
Just checking that you're
yeah, you're
right,
yeah. So, that's a really exciting position, isn't it? And if cancelling Trident is a proxy indicator of more left-wing views, we could be in for a very different sort of parliament if we get in. But we know that there's pressure from the right of the party to renew Trident. There's pressure from Progress to have a watered-down, neoliberal, austerity-like economy. So we absolutely must fight within the Labour Party to maintain a commitment to cancelling Trident and to fighting austerity. Just having a Labour government is not enough. Having a socialist Labour government, or a Labour government in which there are lots of socialists in it, is very, very important. This, I think, could never be a more critical moment for us. We, certainly as a public sector worker, I've worked for 30 years. I could end my career in 6 years' time with a public sector that I don't even recognise. In fact, doesn't provide any of the things that I think are of value. So what are we going to do as Labour Party members? I think most of us here are Labour Party members. Well, we could hope that we're in a coalition with the SNP and that might produce the end of Trident. I would warn slightly against that. I would think we should be aiming for an absolute overall Labour majority. There may be something from a coalition, but we also need to remember that the SNP are not truly socialists. They're also a nationalist party that is interested in national interest. They have some good socialist credentials. Perhaps something could be done. But we need to work for an outright Labour victory, and not just an outright Labour victory. We need to be working within the Labour Party. We need to be attending every branch, every constituency, every district meeting. We need to be arguing against austerity. We need to put the arguments that Andrew Fisher and other economists have put, that overcoming austerity is not, well, austerity is a political construct, is not a reality. Maintaining an austerity position will destroy our economy and destroy the services that we believe. Opposing Trident is part of that. So we need to go to every single meeting and argue these points. I would also suggest that we try to get elected to positions within the party, officers within our executive committees, the CLPs. We need to progress that argument. We need to explain that we represent the grassroots opinion of Labour Party members and the ordinary public who want to preserve services. Okay? I think a very practical thing you can do is write to your PPC, especially if you're a Labour PPC, and express your opinion that actually countering Trident is an essential part of fighting austerity. At the back, we have a petition going to Ed Miliband requesting that we just go into get council Trident either on the manifesto, which is too late now, or we make a career commitment to that once we're in office. Now, obviously, that may not happen straight away, so we need to push, and make sure that the national leadership understand our position. I think also at the time when we're just about to elect new National Policy Forum representatives, we have a good left slate. We need to vote for those people and put pressure on them to cancel Trident. I don't think that would be difficult because I'm sure they'll already agree with that decision. And finally, we have to get into community campaigns. We have to work with people like DPAC. We have to work with every organisation confronting austerity. That means working with a lot of people who are not in the Labour Party, who are on the left outside the party. But we need to form alliances, and we need to remind people that there are socialists in the Labour Party fighting austerity. Because austerity will only be defeated if all of the left unite. There is absolutely no purpose at this moment in time of having any sectarian positions, either within the left more generally, with any group within the left, or within the Labour Party. I wasn't a great fan of Ed Miliband, wasn't the leader I would have chosen, but at the moment he has a platform of policies which will clearly roll back some of the worst excesses of the Tory government. Now is the time to support that campaign, get out into our constituencies, walk up and down the streets, and get as many people to vote Labour. That's